It's a number which is just strictly avoided. So there is some curious thing going on with the number 5. You know, in the Timaeus, as people are coming in and sitting down for dinner, Plato turns to Timaeus and he says, the 1 generates the 2, and the 2 the 3, but where, oh, where is the 4th, my dear Timaeus? And this, the first 4 numbers, seem to lie in a much more archetypically intense relation than the number 5. 5 has been called the first human number. In any case, that was not the anomaly which leaped out at my eye when I graphed this thing. What I noticed was that there was a sawtooth stroke at the beginning and at the end, such that if a reflection, or to use the technical term, if a stereoisometric reflection were rotated 180 degrees, the 2 ends would fit together perfectly. They would dovetail like the joints of a cabinet maker. And it would not fall into this kind of parallelism or congruence at any other point, only at the beginning and the end, and only, I then noticed, if the hexagrams were paired across from each other in such a way that they always added to 64. In other words, 64 is across from 64, that's the exception. 63 is across from 1, 62 is across from 2, 63 is across, and so forth. Okay, so that it sums in all directions to 64. And so I looked at that for a long, long time, and then I saw that what I had done, that though there were these congruencies at the beginning and the end, there were also approaches to parallelism at 6 points in this figure, rather evenly spaced. And I realized then that what I had done is I had taken the entire King Wen sequence, run it forward, run it backward against itself, and created a kind of macro hexagram, a super hexagram, which contained the entire sequence twice, running backward and forward. And at that point I had insight into a curious passage in the Confucian commentaries where it says of the I Ching, the backward running numbers refer to the future, the forward running numbers refer to the past. This was an anagram which makes no sense whatsoever unless you posit the kind of structure that I'm talking about. So then I wondered, what could this thing possibly be for? And I experimented with, I said, okay, this thing I have built in accordance with the principle of hierarchy construction, which is completely expressed at every point in Chinese history and must therefore be assumed to antedate Chinese history and be prehistoric. This hierarchical principle can be used to manipulate this strange figure. Now, the lines of a hexagram are called yao, and there are 384 yao in the 64 hexagrams. Obviously, 6 times 64 is 384. So I said, I will take my figure and I will treat it as the yao of a hexagram. And so I made 6 of them, end to end. And then I said, okay, now I have the 6 lines of a hexagram, some kind of hyper or macro hexagram. But a hexagram is composed of more than 6 lines. It is composed of 2 trigrams. So I took my figure and I multiplied it by a value of 3, and I laid those 2 over the 6, generating everything from a common point of origin. So then I said, okay, now I have everything that is in a hexagram except the hexagrammatic wholeness that is embodied by the thing as a gestalt, as a holnomic entity. So I laid a big one over the 6 little ones and the 2 medium-sized ones, generating everything from a common origin point and having everything return to a common origin point. So it looks, and it's figured in the invisible landscape, like an oscilloscope tracing, a three-leveled tracing of lines, a tremendous mishmash. And this was the problem. The voice then was by this time saying, this is the map, the fractal map of all space and all time. It exists on many levels of resonance. And I personally could feel that. And I spent literally months, and it was madness. Much of this was generated in the Amazon jungle. You have to picture a man in a thatch house on stilts, with the Amazon flowing by, the Indians, the drugs, everything raging outside, and me with my slowly deteriorating pad of graph paper, just drawing these lines hours and hours a day, and looking at them, and finally realizing, convincing myself that it did in fact map time in a certain way, but realizing that it had the quality of a mystical doctrine. The interpretation of these slashing, paralleling, intersecting lines was impossible to convey to another person. I had to have a method of reducing this compound, complex wave to a single wave, moving in a single direction on a single level. Fortunately for you, I'm going to skip over the mathematical details of how this was accomplished, but I assure you that it was accomplished, and to me it was like a series of revelations. I didn't even care about the I Ching, and the notion that out of myself I could extract the techniques to collapse this wave and to produce something coherent out of it, it was like a revelation. And I don't even today know that much about the mathematical ways of handling waves. I'm sure that I reinvented the wheel in some sense, but the point is that I did reinvent it all by myself. And when it was over, I had something which I could show to people. I had the notion that there is a factor in reality which we have previously missed, which is called novelty. Right? And novelty is something which comes and goes. Taoism is talking about this. In the Tao Te Ching it says the way that can be told of is not an unvarying way. Way is clearly a mistranslation for wave. And So then, okay, you have this thing, you've reduced it to one level, it is now an object of reasonable research. But what are the periods? What are the frequencies? What are the harmonic resonances by which this thing expresses itself in time? In other words, what I had generated up to this point was a wave unscaled against the world. And the teaching voice said, now we will show you how to scale this against the world. Remember that there are 384 Yao in the complete sequence. 384 is a number that has not been well regarded by calendar makers. It's 19 days longer than a solar year. However, there have been lunar calendars at various times among the pre-exilic Jews and other people where 384-day lunar calendars were used. I found out all this after the fact. What the voice proposed was that I look at lunations, and I discovered what seemed to me an astonishing fact, which is a lunation is 29.53 days long. 29.53 times 13 is 383.89. So it comes very, very close to being exactly 13 lunations. So I looked at that, and then I said, well, I constructed this wave through application of these principles of hierarchical ordering that are inimical to Chinese thinking.